All right, everybody, welcome back to the long game. I'm Brent Schaefer, and today we're going to be talking about common money mistakes and things that we would do differently. So, Tyler, what do you got for us?
Yeah, I'm excited to get into it. I think it's a great place to start. I don't know if you want me to just throw one to you to start
Go
with
for
and,
it.
and we can
Throw
talk
it.
on it. All right. So first one I've got is chasing hot tips instead of having a plan. I think this falls right into our long game philosophy, which is you got to have a plan and it should be a long-term researched plan, not necessarily jumping at whatever shiny object is thrown your way. And so one of the places that I see that is with stocks, the hot stock, right? We've seen it with the Magnificent Seven the last couple of years. Even though sometimes those hot tips do pay off, it's not a sound way to plan and invest for your future.
Yeah, I think probably everybody has those examples of, oh, yeah, little Johnny came and said to buy NVIDIA, said to do this, that, and the other, and it paid off for them. Way to come out, pick the low hanging fruit. I really like that. I think what we were talking about before the call is like, it depends on what stage of life you're in. So if you are younger, common money mistakes are like straying from the basics, right? Of, making sure that you're making more than you're spending. Are we saving? Are we wasting money on dumb things? Shoring it up there. And then eventually, granted, you got to earn it. Once we get a steady amount of retirement savings up under our belt, then we can branch out and take a few more risks, but only after all of the bases are covered and the homework is done.
No, exactly. I think that's spot on. The money mistakes we see early on in people's lives are, it probably doesn't take somebody who works as a financial advisor to pick out what some of those would be. I think you could almost look at those as the fundamentals, right? Like you said, saving money, not spending more than you earn, starting to set up a retirement savings plan. But yeah, when you graduate into the later stages of your career, that's where you start to see some of the more technical decision making that has to be done. But you still see mistakes made commonly, even by people that have really good financial fundamentals and aren't making the common early on mistakes. They've gotten through that. I think you threw out an example earlier of, and this would probably be extreme, but people who really want to stay away from debt later in their life, cashing out a IRA the second that they have the chance to, so that they can buy a home instead of maybe financing at a low rate. Did you have any specifics you wanted to talk about?
I do want to bring up that the not having debt, using IRA funds to pay cash for a house. I want to bring that up later. I think when we picked the topic, what stood out to me, just given our age, is just people, let's say before 30, maybe even before 40, right? I pretty much see a divergence in terms of things that come across my desk. It's either people that aren't doing enough, so they are just, yeah, we'll get to it, we'll save later. And I think at the end of the day, they know, okay, it's the bill's going to come due at some point in time, and I'm going to need to catch up. That one's pretty easy, and I think people that are out there, it's okay. Maybe need to change some behaviors and get used to cutting back a little bit. But the other one that I'm seeing that I think, people just put a lot of pressure on themselves to almost over prepare. And part of a budget is, okay, let's track the dollars, but like they get down to the bean counting and like counting the cents and, oh man, am I optimizing every single little bit? And there just comes a point of diminishing returns. Once you have the basics done, yeah, sure, I guess you could probably wring a little bit more like out of the orange, get a little bit more juice out of it. But if you get 90-95% of the way there, like in the early stages of your life, hey, let's go work on, potentially trying to grow the income because you've got the savings already automated and set up, and you've got a decently constructed portfolio and strategy that's like geared for long-term wealth. There's just so many diminishing returns that kind of come up there. And the other thing that I try to bring up with clients is like, what are you doing at work? How are your employers, what do they think of you? Are you doing things to be more valuable? Because in this personal finance space, it's like dollars and cents, like penny pinching, beans and rice can only get you so far. At some point in time, we need to make this switch and we need to start growing our incomes. I don't know. I think that's kind of a down the rabbit hole answer, but to sum up the 20s, 30s money mistakes that we see is just either being way too lax, not doing or caring about what's going on as far as your financial health and just mailing it in. And then it's the 180-degree polar opposite of, no, I need to do everything. I need to be on top of it. I need to be looking at rental properties. I need to be like, what's a side hustle? What's this? What's that? And so, oh gosh, you bring a lot of undue stress onto yourself. Granted, some people, they're prepared, they're ready to handle it, and that's what they want, and they really want it.
Yeah.
And I, like, in meetings, I press on that like a pain point of, oh yeah, sure, okay, you want to have a rental house? What do you think about worst case scenario, 2 a.m. phone call and the thing's flooded? Or HVAC goes out and you need to do that, and we've got a 5-figure bill that's come due. Because those are all real things, and not that we're trying to push people away from certain ideas, but I think it's our job, our responsibility as advisors to prepare them for that and make sure that they're ready to deal with those risks before just jumping in of, oh yeah, the TikTok said owning a laundromat was good. That's cool.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that it's not necessarily that the motivation is the mistake or the want or desire to do a side hustle or have rental properties or anything like that, but it's you're opening yourself up to a lot of risk that I don't think people, always completely understand. And having somebody that you can go talk to that says, hey, what if something happens to one of your tenants? Are you adequately insured for that? Or what if the place floods or the HVAC goes out or a washer and dryer fails? If the cash flow isn't heavy enough, then or you don't have enough savings because you're taking out too much leverage to buy the house, you're really putting yourself possibly in a disadvantaged situation, even with something that totally can be a good investment when it's done correctly.
I fall into that one too, being in the space and eventually want to own some form of business, right? That, I think, when I get going down that kind of thought pattern, I think, no, grass is always greener. Let's redirect some of that energy. I know, granted, it's just human nature for the mind to wander and us to want a little bit of variety, but I try to do what I can to redirect that energy back into my primary focus, growing this business, and just as a way to ground myself.
I know when we talk to clients, kids, even 15 to 18 years old, and you mentioned it earlier and you just brought it back up with the growing your income. What's really your greatest wealth building tool is your income. And if you don't have income, then it's really hard to get on the right track and start saving. And that doesn't just mean having a good income when you're 20 years old, but are you in a career path where you have real opportunity for growth? It doesn't mean you have to make $1 billion a year when you're 40 years old. It just means, are you going to be able to consistently grow that income over your lifetime? And that is very important.
And yeah, if you're younger in the career and you're skirting by at work and maybe doing subpar performance and almost barely hanging on because you're out and about, or you've got to go run out and take care of something like a rental, I don't know, tenant needs something or what have you. If you're mailing it in at work, that's your primary means of building up your wealth base. And if you can just redirect that energy back into your primary job, it's okay. Hey boss, what can I do? How can I be of more value to the company? What makes me the most valuable here? I feel like you just get a little bit further at the start.
Sometimes people forget the $3,500 paycheck that they get every month from work is obviously net. That's what they're earning, whereas the $2,000 they're getting from the rental, for some reason, people latch on to that lesser number that's just paying for a mortgage, and they feel that's the better source of income. It's unfortunately just not true.
Okay, we've talked 20s and 30s to death.
Yeah.
Mid-career.
Almost like we're in that range.
Yeah, it's who we end up talking to. Mid-career?
All right. Yeah, mid-career.
What do you think?
So now you're moving into a group of people who hopefully at this point have performed well at work and are starting to earn a larger income. We start running into people that are maxing out their retirement plans through their employer. If you're talking with financially fundamentally sound people, what are the common mistakes that we're seeing there? And some of it can be pour over, where I see people that are maxing out their 401k, but only have a couple $1,000s in the bank account, don't have an adequate emergency fund. And so sometimes it's just as simple as priorities, where, I fall into this boat sometimes where I'm trying to save as much as I can for my retirement. And all the while you're either just putting barely enough away in the savings account every month or going backwards. It's no, we need to readjust our priorities, make sure that we're in a place where if something bad happens, you have the liquid cash to take care of that. And so I think that's probably one of the most common mistakes I see. At least that's a low-hanging fruit still. Is there anything that you see differently? Or
yeah, just as you're walking through that, it's those retirement optimized people grown up 20 years, right? It's, man, if my money is sitting in the bank, it's not going to work for me. But at that point in your life, there's bigger things that can happen, right? Naturally, just where we're at, you accumulate more assets, you got more things, you got things that can go wrong. And that opportunity cost of being fully invested and not having any savings, sometimes it can bite you. If people's got adequate cash flow, they can smooth that over. At this stage, busy professionals, peak kind of earnings years, okay, are they taking time to sit down and meet with somebody to make sure that their plan is on track? Some people will be like, I'm maxing out my retirement account. That should be good enough, right? Most often, no, it can be, but how do you really know? When do you want to retire? Almost as we're building things up, now we got to get ready for the plane to land, and you need to sit down with somebody. You really need to talk through what's the budget? What does the lifestyle look like in retirement? What do we want to accomplish with the remaining period of time that we have left in our life? Because oftentimes, mid-stage career, gosh, they've got kids in school. College is expensive if they want to pay for that out of cash flow. And then once they make it through that, maybe it's 10, 15 years, 20 years till retirement. And that's the next big milestone. And quite frankly, I love sitting down talking with people, like building out a bunch of scenarios in Right Capital. What does it look like if we do this? What does it look like if it's $10,000 a month, $12,000 a month? We retire at 65, 67, 70, take Social Security here, there. You know, we do the annual reviews, and it's so easy to compare that to going and seeing your primary physician, right? Of like checking height, weight, vitals, blood pressure, getting a blood panel. Financial health is one of those things, and you can have a fully funded retirement and be on track. And we could go through a 2008, you can go through a 2022 and have a significant hit to your portfolio. That can change things. I know that earlier when we were having the tariff talk and daily the market was moving so much, like the portfolio value and how it all plays out, it really does impact how those numbers look. I think that's what I've got for mid-stage career. Good time to bring it back up of being financially mature. I've got a credit card, but I pay it off at the end of the month. I don't have a revolving balance. I don't have any of that. Like no debt. If I'm going to buy a car, I'm going to pay cash for it. If I'm going to buy something, I'm paying cash for it. Like I have grown up enough to not use debt. And just talking with accountants there locally, it does come up of somebody wanting to buy a new house and they sold one, but they moved into a different house and they ended up taking money out of their IRA to put a down payment on this house. And depending on how much that down payment is, Tyler, just for the people listening, like IRA distributions are counted towards ordinary income. And so if you take a $500,000 IRA distribution, you're going to pay a lot of tax really quickly. And unfortunately, in this case, everything you're led to believe is like all debt is bad, or depending on who you listen to. But the taxes owed on that versus what the mortgage would have been, or if you would have been a little bit more strategic about, oh, okay, let's not, maybe we do a 15-year and then also do additional payments on top of that, you probably would have been better off to actually finance the thing rather than just write the one big check.
Yeah, no, definitely. Using debt to your advantage is a thing. It's not just run away from it as fast as you can. There's times where, you know, even the amount of interest you have to pay is lesser than the amount of tax you'd have to pay. Just for anybody that's listening, it's on $500,000. That puts you, just with that, if you didn't have any other income, if you're married, that puts you in the 32% tax bracket. A portion of that $500,000 distribution is getting taxed at 32%. And most people at this stage of life still have income. And yeah, you're talking about probably a significant sum of it getting taxed at the 30% range. And so it's something that needs to be considered, certainly.
Thanks for doing the calculation, or not calculation, but just checking out the tax brackets. Because I know that as soon as I was saying that, I was like, okay, wait a minute, $500,000 mortgage over the life of the loan, like making minimum payments. Like, okay, there might be a finance charge that, you know, yeah, I don't know, what, 32% on $500,000, you're 150 and some change, which, you know, depending on where mortgage rates are at, but I don't know. We can, just for the folks at home or people listening, is we don't shoot directly from the hip, like casual like that. If we were going to actually recommend something, it would be a mixture of, hey, how much can we squeeze out? I don't know. There's a lot of strategies that you can use for certain. Yeah. In this instance, the polarity of one, you cash out your IRA totally. And then on the other side, you finance the answer is somewhere in the middle that gets you like the optimal result.
No, those are the only two options. Those are the only two that you have. Those are the only two you can look at. No, of course, I'm kidding. No, I think one thing with this age group that I do see is this is where investment mistakes start to get costly. And a lot of the time, it's not that they're picking bad investments. If we're talking about these people that have these strong fundamentals, they've probably picked a pretty good diversified investment portfolio. But then you talk about something like COVID happening, where markets were down, what was it, almost 30% pretty quickly. And then it did turn around. But you've seen market downturns. Maybe you've never seen a really bad market when you get to 50 or so. But we always say here, when the stock market's going up, you hear, oh, it was up 20%. And when things go down, you hear it's a dollar figure. And so for people that have saved until they're 50 years old and they have $750,000 in their 401k, and now they're seeing these drastic downturns, that's an emotional challenge. And it's more emotional than I think people sometimes give credit to. It's a lot harder to watch large sums of money fluctuate in value than it is to watch smaller sums of money, even when that smaller sum of money might have been the same percentage of your net worth, if you will. And so that's where I think having somebody that you can call every time that you're worried, or that you can go in and meet with and walk through, not only are things likely going to turn around and you're going to recover some of these losses, but more importantly, we've planned for this. We still have adequate cash reserves, adequate fixed income reserves that you're going to be able to pull from if it takes us a couple of years for the stock market to turn back around. And so I see a lot of people in this age group start to make those knee-jerk reactions where maybe they sell some or all of their stock portion and put it to cash because they're worried about the market going down, and they end up hurting themselves worse than they would have been to just ride it out.
Yeah. And during every annual review, right, we do a pulse check on, hey, how do you feel about it? The conversation on investment expectations is very easy to have when the market's going up, and it becomes difficult to have when the market's going down. Percentages on the way up, dollars on the way down. As advisors, that's like keeping people in their seats, keeping our long strategy, writing it out. That's where we can really help our clients. And that's where rubber meets the road, like keeping them invested, keeping them with it. Just as retail investors, there's the JP Morgan guide to the markets on what the average retail investor does compared to just the market, and compared to the 60-40 portfolio, and it lags it by a couple of percent, like over a period of 20 years. And that's just people being emotional, which is totally understandable.
Yeah.
I think if even me knowing what I know, seeing the dollars, right, you can get caught up in it. You can get caught up in it if you allow yourself to do that. And I think the reason that we don't is just because we are constantly telling people, stay invested. Your portfolio is built to manage, make its way through these markets. And from now until 5-10 years down the road, you're really going to wish you didn't sell.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Do you want to jump to the last stage of life? So retirement.
It's a tricky one because if somebody's been with us for an extended period of time, we really, if it's rough around the edges, I feel like we can really get them, like in working with them, in meeting with them annually, prodding them, hey, don't do this, don't do this. The outcomes are a little bit better. For people who haven't been working with an advisor, then things go haywire. But like my brain, as we bring this up of the people that I'm talking to in this age group, it's not mostly clients. Very rarely are there individuals that get to that stage of life without an advisor.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. First of all, I think we spend a lot of time trying to educate clients. And so if they worked with us for 20 years and they're into that 75, 80-year-old range, right, they're at a point where they're very comfortable with their situation and their plan, and they trust the investment strategy, probably not making a lot of mistakes at that age. But for people that maybe are, just retired and for whatever reason, or good on them, they were able to get to that point without working with a financial advisor, and they get to be 75 or so and they have kids and grandkids. The number one thing I see is either the lack of an estate plan or a not well thought through estate plan, right? And people that maybe have accumulated wealth at this point, especially in Washington state where the estate tax exemption is much lower than the federal exemption, we got to make sure that they have the correct language in their will to try to preserve as much of that exemption as we can. And then beyond that, not having had a conversation with their kids and or grandkids on, this is what we want to happen when we pass away. And I think that's the number one thing I see from people of that age. And frankly, that probably could fall into the category of the age group before too, because this is something you should be taking care of when your kids are young.
Yeah.
But this is the place where it really starts to get important because not every day is guaranteed, as everybody knows, especially when you start getting into those older ages.
That's what I was going to say. Is it like when you first start having kids or you get married and maybe you've got substantial property and things that you need to have directed? Yeah, sure. It's easy to have that conversation when 40s, 50s. But as you get closer to, as Ray Capital puts it, your planning horizon, that conversation becomes more real, more visceral, like legitimately, hey, I'm going to pass away. This is where I want my assets to go. And when you're free, however close you are to that date, like it just becomes all the more real. And as advisors, we make a point to bring it up because it's important, leaving the legacy, making sure everything goes the way you want it to go. Because when you're gone, your documents are all that you've got left. And I know I've seen handshake agreements, bonds, like words being exchanged of, oh yeah, no, that never happened. And it has, right? And gosh, you just want to do everything that you can while you're still here to bulletproof it. Reminding people of their own mortality, it's going to impact their assets. That's a difficult thing to do. It's an important thing to do. And I think that's what gives me the courage to bring it up during meetings. But getting family members involved is always paramount, making sure everybody's there and they hear what they hear. Granted, it can be interpreted different ways, right? Depending on how many people, like a game of telephone, how many people you got around the table. But I know that if our clients are comfortable with us talking with the next generation and having that discussion, I've sat in on meetings where we've done that and omitted how much money or how much the amount of assets that are at stake, just letting people know where everything is at, how it's intended to pass. And those conversations, yeah, I think some definite money mistakes of dying intestate or things that can be avoided. It's just that good hygiene.
Certainly some of the money mistakes that we see commonly. I'm sure there's a lot more, and I'd love to hear from anyone that thinks that we missed anything paramount, because I'm sure we did. Because there's a lot of things that can be done that either are blatant mistakes or aren't the most effective or efficient. And yeah, I'd love to hear anything else.
Yeah, we've definitely got that bias of only talking with people that, really want to come talk with a financial advisor.
True.
Yeah. So cool. Tyler, well, thank you for contributing to the conversation today.
Of course.
We'll pick a topic for our next time. But outside of that, any closing thoughts?
No, that was a great conversation. I think we went longer than we had originally intended.
Perfect. I'm going to let you get back to your day. Everybody, thank you for listening in to The Long Game, and we'll catch you next time.